Hi, third grade. I am so excited to read chapter 9 of Matilda with you today, okay? We're going to pick up where Miss Paglarani left off, and I can't wait. But if you have not listened to chapter 1 through 8, you need to pause this video and you need to go listen to the playlist. Because if not, you will be very confused on what happened in the story. Even if you saw the movie, movies and books have differences in them, okay? So I posted the playlist on yesterday's lesson. Make sure you go watch that first and watch all of the read alouds with Miss Paglarani, chapter 1 through 8. Okay? If you've done that already, now you can listen to chapter 9 and read along with me. Okay? Now, after we read this chapter, you're going to have an exit ticket. Make sure you watch this video all the way through. Watch it again. Take notes. Do whatever you need to understand, because in the exit ticket, you will not get it if you do not watch this video. There may be some confusing parts, and I'm going to go through it with you, okay? All right, so let's review really quickly. I'm going to give you a summary of what happened in chapter 8, okay? So in chapter 8, that one was about the Trunchbull, right? So what happened is Matilda was so advanced. She was so bright and so smart that Miss Honey takes it upon herself to try to get Matilda to advance to a higher grade. She wants to move her up. So Miss Trunchbull does not believe the wonderful things that Miss Honey says about Matilda. And like Matilda's parents, Miss Trunchbull and her parents prefer to believe the worst about Matilda. They don't believe the great things about the little girl. So Miss Trunchbull believes that Matilda must have stink bombed the study, like the library, and Miss Honey must want to get rid of her. And so that's what she's thinking. Miss Trunchbull's like, oh, you must want to get rid of this little girl because she's trouble, when Miss Honey is really just trying to help her. Okay? All right. So we're going to go to chapter 9, which is about the parents. Okay? And we're going to learn more about them. So there's some vocabulary that's going to be in this chapter that I want to show you. All right? So look here. The first one I want to show you is the word reassembled. Say reassembled. Reassembled means gathered together again. So the prefix re, means again, to do it again. Redo, right? Like rewatch. That means you're going to watch it again. So assemble means to put together or get things together. So if you reassemble, you do it again. So reassembled will be in the chapter. Make sure you pay attention and look out for it. It means to gather together again. What does reassembled mean? Good. Reassembled, gather together again, to put it together again, all right? Now there's another word that's going to be in the chapter. It is intrigue. Say intrigue. Intrigue is when something intrigues you. It arouses the curiosity. It makes you curious, or it interests you. You get interested, like, ooh, this is interesting. I'm interested in this. I like this, or I'm fascinated by it, okay? Intrigue means to arouse or make the curiosity jump up and rise, or interest you or fascinate you. So you can be really intrigued by something that you think is fascinating or interests you, okay? Like you can be intrigued by Roblox. It fascinates you. It interests you. You're very intrigued by it. Okay, so Roblox can intrigue you, or whatever other things that you're interested in. All right, so intrigue, say it. Arouse the curiosity or interest of. Fascinate. Good. All right. Look out for those words in chapter 9. We are going to start reading. And in this chapter, I want you to be thinking about the characters and the setting and how they're the same and how they're different than one of our favorite stories, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Okay? Roald Dahl, if you did yesterday's lesson, which you should have, if you haven't, stop here. go back and do Tuesday's lesson. All right. We watched a brain pop video on Roald Dahl, the author and writer of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Matilda. There are lots of similarities and differences. So while we're reading chapter 9, I want you to think about the parents in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Think about Charlie's parents and some of the other parents, and think about the parents in Matilda, and think about what's different and what's similar, okay? Because you're going to answer that in your exit ticket today, all right? So that's what we're going to be thinking about while we're reading, okay? And don't forget to look out for the vocab. All right, let's get started. The parents. When Miss Honey emerged from the headmistress's study, most of the children were outside in the playground. Her first move was to go around to the various teachers who taught the senior class and borrow from them a number of textbooks, books on algebra, geometry, French, English, literature, and the like. Then she sought out Matilda and called her into the classroom. "There is no point," she said, "in you sitting in a class doing nothing while I am teaching the rest of the form the 2 times tables and how to spell cat and rat and mouse. So during each lesson, I shall give you one of these textbooks to study. At the end of the lesson, you can come up to me with your questions if you have any, and I shall try to help you. How does that sound?" "Thank you, Miss Honey," Matilda said. "That sounds fine." "I am sure," Miss Honey said, "that we'll be able to get you moved into a much higher form later on." So form means grade. "But for the moment, the headmistress wishes you to stay where you are." "Very well, Miss Honey," Matilda said. "Thank you so much for getting those books for me." What a nice child she is, Miss Honey thought. I don't care what her father said about her. She seems very quiet and gentle to me, and not a bit stuck up in spite of her brilliance. In fact, she hardly seems aware of it. So when the class reassembled, there's our vocab word. So when the class reassembled, Matilda went to her desk and began to study a textbook on geometry, which Miss Henny had given her. So reassembled means to gather together again. So when the class reassembled or came back together, gathered together again, Matilda went to their desk and began to study a textbook on geometry, which Miss Honey had given her. The teacher kept half an eye on her all the time and noticed that the child very soon became deeply absorbed in the book. She never glanced up once during the entire lesson. Miss Honey, meanwhile, was making another decision. She was deciding that she would go herself and have a secret talk with Matilda's mother and father as soon as possible. She simply refused to let the matter rest where it was. The whole thing was ridiculous. She couldn't believe that the parents were totally unaware of their daughter's remarkable talents. After all, Mr. Wormwood was a successful motor car dealer, so she presumed he was a fairly intelligent man himself. In any event, parents never underestimated the abilities of their own children. Quite the reverse. Sometimes it was nigh impossible for a teacher to convince the proud father or mother that their beloved offspring was a complete nitwit, meaning like not brilliant. Miss Honey felt confident that she would have no difficulty in convincing Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood that Matilda was something very special indeed. The trouble was going to be to stop them from getting over enthusiastic. So Miss Honey is thinking they're going to be so excited that Matilda is so bright and brilliant and that she needs to move up to another grade. And now Miss Honey's hopes began to expand even further. She started wondering whether permission might not be sought from the parents for her to give private tuition to Matilda after school. The prospect of coaching a child as bright as this appealed enormously to her professional instinct as a teacher. And suddenly she decided that she would go and call on Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood that very evening. She would go fairly late, between 9 and 10 o'clock, when Matilda was sure to be in bed. And that is precisely what she did. Having got the address from the school records, Miss Honey set out to walk from her own home to the Wormwoods house shortly after 9. She found the house in a pleasant street where each smallish building was separated from its neighbors by a bit of garden. It was a modern brick house that could not have been cheap to buy, and the name on the gate said Cozy Nook. Nosy Cook might have been better, Miss Honey thought. She was given to playing with words in that way. She walked up to the path and rang the bell. And while she stood waiting, she could hear the television blaring inside. The door was opened by a small, ratty-looking man with a thin, ratty mustache who was wearing a sports coat that had a sports coat is like a jacket, that had an orange and red stripe in the material, and it's kind of a dressy jacket. Yes, he said, peering out at Miss Honey. If you're selling raffle tickets, I don't want any. So what is he thinking? He's thinking that she's selling raffle tickets. I'm not, Miss Honey said, and please forgive me for butting in on you like this. I am Matilda's teacher at school, and it is important I have a word with you and your wife. Got into trouble already, has she? Mr. Wormwood said, so blocking the doorway. So he's trying to stop Miss Honey from coming in, and he's thinking, oh Lord, here we go. Matilda's in trouble. So he's not thinking the best of her. Well, she's your responsibility from now on. You have to deal with her. So Mr. Wormwood is like, you deal with her, Miss Honey. I'm not dealing with it. You're the teacher. I want you to pay attention to this picture. Pay attention to the illustrations that the illustrator drew. Look at the door. Look at Mr. Wormwood. Look at his facial expressions, his body language, and what he's doing with it. She's in no trouble at all, Miss Honey said. I have come with good news about her. Quite startling news, Mr. Wormwood. Do you think I might come in for a few minutes and talk to you about Matilda? We are right in the middle of watching one of our favorite programs, Mr. Wormwood said. This is most inconvenient. Remember, convenient means it's a good time, it's working out well. Inconvenient, not good for us. Why don't you come back some other time? Miss Honey began to lose patience. Mr. Wormwood, she said, if you think some rotten TV program is more important than your daughter's future, then you ought not to be a parent. Why don't you switch the darn thing off and listen to me? So she's saying, like, you should listen and not, if you can't focus on your child, if you think the TV's more important, maybe you shouldn't be a parent. That shook Mr. Wormwood. He was not used to being spoken to in that way. He peered carefully at the slim, frail woman who stood so resolutely out on the porch. Oh, very well then, he snapped. Come on in and let's get it over with. Miss Honey stepped briskly inside. Mrs. Wormwood isn't going to thank you for this, the man said, as he led her into the sitting room where a large platinum blonde woman was gazing rapturously at the TV screen. Who is it? The woman said, not looking round. Some school teacher, Mr. Wormwood said. She says she's got to talk to us about Matilda. He crossed to the TV set and turned down the sound, but left the picture on the screen. Don't do that, Harry, Mrs. Wormwood cried out. Willard is just about to propose to Angelica. You can still watch it while we're talking, Mr. Wormwood said. This is Matilda's teacher. She says she's got some sort of news to give us. My name is Jennifer Honey, Miss Honey said. How do you do, Mrs. Wormwood? Mrs. Wormwood glared at her and said, What's the trouble then? Nobody invited Miss Honey to sit down, so she chose a chair and sat down anyway. This, she said, was your daughter's first day at school. We know that, Mrs. Wormwood said, ratty about missing her program. Ratty means like annoyed about missing it. Is that all you came to tell? Look at her face, you guys. Look at her body language. Think about how she might be feeling right now. Is that all you came to tell us? Miss Honey stared hard into the other woman's wet gray eyes, and she allowed the silence to hang in the air until Mrs. Wormwood became uncomfortable. Do you wish me to explain why I came, she said. Get on with it, Mrs. Wormwood said. I'm sure you know, Miss Honey said, that children in the bottom class at at school are not expected to be able to read or spell or juggle with numbers when they first arrive. 5-year-olds cannot do that. But Matilda can do it all. And if I am to believe her, I wouldn't, Mrs. Wormwood said. She was still ready at losing the sound on the TV. Was she lying then, Miss Honey said, when she told me that nobody taught her to multiply or read? Did either of you teach her? Teach her what? Miss Wormwood said. To read books, Miss Honey said. Perhaps you did teach her. Perhaps she was lying. Perhaps you have shelves full of books all over the house. I wouldn't know. Perhaps you are both great readers. Of course we read, Mr. Wormwood said. Don't be so daft. I read the autocar and the motor from cover to cover every week. That's a magazine, you guys. That's not the same as reading books. This child has already read an astonishing number of books, Miss Honey said. I was simply trying to find out if she came from a family that loved good literature. We don't hold with book reading, Mr. Wormwood said. You can't make a living from sitting on your fanny, that means your bottom, and reading storybooks. We don't keep, look at their faces and body language. We don't keep them in the house. I see, Miss Honey said. Well, all I came to tell you was that Matilda has a brilliant mind, but I expected you knew that already. Of course I knew she could read, the mother said. She spends her life up in the room buried in some silly book. But does it not intrigue you, Miss Honey said? Oop, there's our vocab word, intrigue. Remember, intrigue means to interest you or fascinate you. Doesn't that make you curious? Does it not intrigue you? Miss Honey said that a little 5-year-old child is reading long adult novels by Dickens and Hemingway? Doesn't that make you jump up and down with excitement? Not particularly, the mother said. I'm not in favor of blue stocking girls. A girl should think about making herself look attractive so she can get a good husband later on. Looks is more important than books, Miss Hunky. The name is Honey, Miss Honey said. Now look at me, Mrs. Wormwood said. Now she's telling Miss Honey to look at her. Here's Mr. Wormwood. And look at you. Mr. Wormwood is enjoying the look at Mrs. Wormwood. You chose books. I chose looks. Miss Honey looked at the plain, plump person with the smug suit pudding face who was sitting across the room. What did you say? She asked. I said you chose books and I chose looks, Mrs. Wormwood said. And who's finished up the better off? Who finished up better off? Me, of course. I'm sitting pretty in a nice house with a successful businessman, and you're left slaving away teaching a lot of nasty little children the ABCs. Quite right, Sugar Plum, Mr. Wormwood said, casting a look of such simpering sloppiness at his wife, it would have made a cat sick. Miss Honey decided that if she was going to get anywhere with these people, she must not lose her temper. I haven't told you all of it yet, she said. Matilda, so far as I can gather, at this early age, is also a kind of mathematical genius. She can multiply complicated figures in her head like lightning. What's the point of that when you can buy a calculator? Mr. Wormwood said. A girl doesn't get a man by being brainy, Mrs. Wormwood said. Look at the film star, for instance, she added, pointing at the silent TV screen, where a bossomy female was being embraced by a craggy actor in the moonlight. You don't think she got him to do that by multiplying figures at him, do you? Not likely. And now she's going to marry her. You see, if he doesn't, and she's going to live in a mansion with a butler and lots of maids. Miss Honey could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had heard that parents like this existed all over the place and that children turned out to be delinquent and dropouts, but it was still a shock to meet a pair of them in the flesh. Matilda's trouble, she said, trying once again, is that she is so far ahead of everyone else around her that it might be worthy thinking about some extra kind of private tuition. I seriously believe that she could be brought up to university standard in 2 or 3 years with the proper coaching. University! Mr. Wormwood shouted, bouncing up in his chair. Who wants to go to university, for heaven's sake? All they learn is bad habits. That is not true, Miss Honey said. If you had a heart attack this minute and had to call a doctor, that doctor would be a university graduate. If you got sued for selling someone a rotten secondhand car, you'd have to get a lawyer, and he'd be a university graduate too. Do not despise clever people, Mr. Wormwood. But I can see we're not going to agree here. I'm sorry I burst in on you like this. Miss Honey rose from her chair and walked out of the room. Mr. Wormwood followed her to the front door and said, "Good of you to come, Miss Hawks. Or is it Miss Harris?" "It's neither," Miss Honey said, "but let it go." And away she went. All right, friends, we're going to stop there. You're going to read it again. Make sure you take notes. Make sure you pay attention. And then you're going to go and complete your exit ticket. I hope you enjoyed chapter 9. And later on, we will go to chapter 10. Have a good one.